November 2004. A teenager in a dimly lit bedroom unboxes a brand new silver-rimmed LCD monitor, his eyes wide with the promise of the future. He has just traded in a £40 beige-coloured monster for a screen as thin as a magazine, a flat-panel marvel that promised to save his desk space and his eyesight. This was the moment the display industry had been waiting for, the final nail in the coffin for the vacuum tube. Within 5 years, the cathode ray tube, CRT, would be systematically purged from every living room, office and dormitory on the planet, replaced by a multi-billion-dollar empire of liquid crystals and light-emitting diodes. We were told this was progress. We were told that flat was synonymous with better, and that the flickering ghosts of the analog era were a relic of a primitive past. But as we chased higher resolutions and thinner profiles, we unknowingly traded away the very soul of the moving image. Beneath the 3840 by 2160 pixels and the HDR marketing lies a sterile digital lie that modern hardware is still struggling to fix. The display industry sold us a sanitized version of reality that stripped away motion clarity, depth, and the organic glow of the electron gun. This is the shimmering high-voltage secret buried in the landfill. Why modern games actually look better on a piece of technology from the 20th century. The rise of the flat-panel display was a masterclass in corporate engineering and logistical convenience. Shipping a 30-inch CRT was a nightmare, involving heavy-duty cardboard, massive freight costs, and the constant risk of implosion. The LCD, by contrast, was a dream, lightweight, stackable, and cheap to manufacture once the factories were at scale. By the mid-2000s, every major tech titan from Sony to Samsung had pivoted, convincing the world that the fixed pixel was the ultimate evolution of the screen.
We entered an era of native resolution, where every display had a set number of physical pixels, and any attempt to run a game at a different resolution resulted in a blurry, interpolated mess. We surrendered the flexibility of the analog signal for the rigid digital grid of the high-definition era. It was a trade-off that prioritized the aesthetic of the hardware over the quality of the software, and for a decade we simply didn't notice what we had lost. But the dark underbelly of the flat-panel revolution was hidden in the physics of how these screens actually show motion. To understand why a game like Cyberpunk 2077 or Elden Ring can look off on a $5,000 OLED, you have to understand the fundamental flaw of the sample and hold technique. Modern displays hold a frame steady until the next one is ready, creating a smear in the human eye as it tracks movement across the screen. Even at 120 Hz or 240 Hz, the digital image judders and ghosts, suffocating the detail in a fog of persistent blur. The CRT, however, was a weapon of speed. Its electron gun didn't hold an image, it scanned it across phosphors that glowed and faded in microseconds. It was a strobe light for the senses, creating a level of motion clarity that modern panels can only mimic with black frame insertion, a desperate digital hack to replicate the natural behavior of a vacuum tube. The scale of the empire's deception extends into the very nature of light itself. An LCD or an LED is a transmissive technology. It uses a backlight to shine through a layer of liquid crystals, trying and often failing to block out light to create black. Even the most advanced local dimming zones are a clumsy attempt to replicate what the CRT did effortlessly: total darkness. In a CRT, if a pixel is black, the electron beam simply doesn't hit it.
There is no backlight bleed, no halo effect around bright objects, and no grey-washed shadows. The contrast was infinite long before OLED made it a luxury feature. We were sold dynamic contrast and local dimming as revolutionary breakthroughs, when in reality they were just expensive bandages for a wound the industry inflicted on itself when it abandoned the vacuum tube. Furthermore, the perfect square pixel of a modern monitor is a disaster for art. Game developers for 30 decades designed their worlds with the bloom and softness of the CRT in mind. On an analog screen, those sharp, jagged edges of a 2D sprite or a low-polygon 3D model would bleed together, creating a natural anti-aliasing that the human brain interpreted as detail. When you take those same games and blast them onto a 4K LCD, you aren't seeing more detail, you are seeing the bones of the game. The screen door effect of a CRT's shadow mask or aperture grille acted as a transformative filter, turning a handful of pixels into a lush, organic texture. Today, we use shaders and AI upscaling to try and re-inject that warmth into our games, spending thousands of dollars on GPU power to simulate the behavior of a glass tube we used to throw in the trash. Yet the most insidious betrayal of the modern era is input lag. In the analog days, the signal from the console to the screen was instantaneous. The electron beam moved as fast as electricity allowed. In the digital era, every frame must be processed, scaled, and buffered before it hits the panel. We have introduced a glass floor of latency that separates the player from the action. Professional gamers spend thousands on ultra-low latency monitors to get back to the baseline that a 1990s television provided for free. The display industry turned responsiveness into a premium tier, selling us the solution to a problem they created.
We are paying for the privilege of returning to a level of performance that was standard during the Clinton administration. The environmental cost of this shift is equally staggering. As we transition to the disposable era of thin film displays, we created a global crisis of e-waste. CRTs were built like tanks. They could last for 20, 30, or 40 years with minimal maintenance. Modern panels are fragile, non-repairable, and designed with planned obsolescence in mind. One dead pixel or one failing backlight strip, and the entire unit becomes a toxic slab of plastic and heavy metals heading for a landfill in the global south. The display empire thrives on this churn, convincing us every 2 years that we need a slightly wider color gamut or a slightly thinner bezel, while the fundamental issues of motion blur and latency remain unsolved at the hardware level. There is also the resolution myth. We have been conditioned to believe that 4K or 8K is the ultimate goal, yet these numbers are often meaningless without proper motion handling. A 4K image that smears when you turn the camera has less effective resolution than a standard definition CRT that maintains its clarity during a fast-paced shootout. We are chasing a static marketing number while ignoring the dynamic reality of how we actually play games. The industry metastasized into a numbers game where higher pixel counts are used to mask the lack of innovation in scanning technology. We are looking at higher and higher resolutions of increasingly blurry images. But the most visceral argument for the CRT is the glow. There is a luminescence to a phospho-based display that a backlit panel can never replicate. It is the difference between looking at a photograph of a fire and sitting in front of the fireplace. The light from a CRT is emissive. It is born from the impact of electrons hitting chemicals, giving the image a weight and a depth that feels tangible.
This is why retro enthusiasts and purists are now scouring thrift stores and eBay, paying hundreds of dollars for professional broadcast monitors, PVMs, that were once destined for the scrap heap. They are searching for the real thing in an age of digital imitations. This isn't just about nostalgia, it's about a technical standard that was abandoned for the sake of profit margins rather than visual superiority. We moved from an analog era of infinite resolution and zero latency to a digital era of fixed grids and processing delays. We traded the soul of the phosphors for the convenience of the liquid crystal. Every time you see a retro filter in a modern indie game, you are seeing a ghost, a digital simulation of a superior physical reality that we were tricked into giving up.